Great stuff. Well, we'll get started then. So thanks everyone for joining us this morning. My name's Hayley Burton and I work with Vocal, which is Voice of Carers across Lothian, and we're sort of co-hosting this event in partnership with Sue and the team at Carer Positive today. I think just to start off with a little bit of housekeeping, just to say we are recording the session, so if you don't want to be on the recording, please just turn off your cameras and you won't be visible on the recording there. Most important thing is keep yourself safe throughout this as well. It might evoke some emotions with some of the content today, so if you feel that you need to step away at any point, please do so. We've got a comfort break at just before 11 o'clock, so there's a little bit of time to dip out then as well. Feel free to sort of raise hands, ask questions, use the chat as we go through. We want this to be a sort of informal interactive session as well, so that you get the most out of today as well as we go through everything. So Linda, myself, Christine and Sue and I will try and keep an eye on the chat, but if we don't see anything, just give us a wee nudge in case not. But really start off with welcome and happy Carers Week, and it's got to be a celebration as much as we're finding out about the flexibility of working and the new legislation that's coming along as well. And this year's theme is making carers visible, valued and supported. So we'll hear from some great speakers today that'll take us through those themes. So kicking us off is Sue McClintock. Sue is going to take us through what's changing in the world of work. She joined Carers Positive in 2013 to undertake the development of the Carer Positive Award programme, which was launched in 2014. Sue manages the project across the country and engages with the public, private and voluntary sectors, employers generally, to raise awareness of business case for supporting working carers. And at the moment, there's about 230 organisations in Scotland that are recognised as Carer Positive employers, which is fantastic. Sue has a background in economics and social policy, and working initially in Scottish local government and then within consultancy, focusing on employability and labour market interventions for disadvantaged groups. So I will hand you over to Sue.
Thank you, Hayley, and good morning everyone, and nice to see so many familiar faces, so many Carer Positive employers, but also some other folk here who I've not had the pleasure of meeting before, so it's really nice to see everyone and welcome. I'm just going to I'm not going to spend too much time talking today because I think it's probably far more interesting and informative to hear from employers themselves, and we've got some great examples here of good practice from speakers you'll hear from in a little while. But I'm going to give a wee broad overview of what this Carers Week is all about, and as Hayley said, a bit of an introduction into some of the things that are changing in the world of work. And then you'll hear from Donna specifically on the kind of legislative side of that. So I'm going to share my screen. I've got some slides, and I would say to everyone, please stop me at any point, put your hand up, put a comment in. We do want it to be informal and discussion based. So I'm happy to sort of chat through any of anything at any point. So I'll start with this and I'll put it onto the slide view. If you just bear with me for a second. Okay. So here we go, and I think everyone here is obviously aware that it's Carers Week, but just for those of you who don't know the background, it's an annual campaign to raise awareness of caring and particularly sort of highlight to people the challenges that unpaid carers face, but also importantly to recognise the immense contribution that carers make to communities and families all over the UK. And one of the important things I think from an employer's perspective as well is it gives us a great opportunity to help people in work, really to help identify themselves as carers, to help them recognise themselves as carers. So anything employers can do to raise that awareness and visibility is really, really important, and Carers Week's great for being able to kind of be a focal point for that. One of the things I would say though is we would say Carers Week is every week, but this is it's good to have this focus in June, and we always try to do stuff to celebrate it every year. Hayley mentioned that the theme is making caring visible, valued and supported. Each year Carers Week does have a theme, and I think particularly after the last couple of years of COVID, people did become aware more, I think, of the contribution and the struggles and the challenges that carers face. There was a lot that highlighted the particular challenges faced by carers and really the need to value what they do and to support them. So it's good that that's the theme this year. And I want to just talk a little bit about that theme in terms of the importance of each of those strands. And the first one, as we said, was making caring visible. And it's maybe just quite useful to, at this stage, always remind people of what we mean by who is a carer, because it does still get confused for people who are paid carers who go into folks' houses and help with caring roles as part of their job. So I think in anything that workplaces are doing, it's always helpful just to sort of remind people what we mean by who is a carer. And there's a wee definition there that I'm sure everyone here is familiar with already, but it's helpful to remind people to identify themselves. Just in terms of the statistics, just a few stats here, and these are now a couple of years old, but it is estimated that just under 760,000 people are unpaid carers in Scotland. Now, I have to say that was before COVID, and we know that at one point during COVID, an additional 400,000 people became carers, and I know that that figure will still be increased to a degree. So one of the caveats with statistics is that we never know the full extent of how many people in Scotland are carers. We know that 3 in 5 of us are expected to care for someone at one point in our lives. And in terms of our working lives, the statistic around that is round about 1 in 7 or 1 in 8 of the workforce are likely to be carers. And obviously that might change depending on what the demographic of the workplace is, but there are very few people who at one point in their working lives are unlikely to be touched by caring. With the ageing population and the changing sort of demographic picture in Scotland and across the UK, it's estimated that by 2037, 50% more people across the UK will be carers. And again, with those figures, we always think these are underestimations. So in work, it's important to just always know that there are likely to be carers amongst your staff, and that for employers, it's really important to try and raise that visibility and encourage staff to identify themselves, and encourage managers to reach out to staff who are carers. So that's all around the visibility. We know that caring's valuable, and there are many reports that have shown that over the years, and one of the things that got picked up during COVID was a research report by Oxfam that estimated that unpaid care work was worth £36 billion a year in Scotland, and that's just one of the figures that highlights the contribution that carers make. And I particularly like this definition of a carer, because we talk about carers who look after friends or family who have a disability, an illness, an addiction and frailty, or who need support in life. But it's much, much more than that. It's all the you know, the different responsibilities. It's washing them and their laundry and their dishes and keeping appointments and records and tempers and giving medicine and time and hugs, filling forms and fridges and silences, dealing with doctors and nurses and pharmacists and social workers and benefit agencies and care workers, and all that with a lack of sleep, and with so many other elements as well. And I guess when you think of people who are doing all that and combining it with working, it's not hard to understand the challenges that carers who are juggling work and care can sometimes feel under. So carers do need the support to manage their, you know, a life of their own sometimes. So in a work context, it's really helpful to let carers know that you understand their challenges and connect them to the workplace support that you have in place. And also to look, you know, wider than that, and employers can be tremendously helpful in signposting carers to external sources of information and advice. Primarily, and you know, most importantly, signpost carers to their local carers centres. Particularly Vocal, obviously, if you're in this area, and other supportive charities. There's plenty of all carer centres and Carers Scotland and other charities. We all have kind of leaflets and information and booklets that we can make available, and that's just what's on the screen there is also just a little sort of leaflet from the Carers Week website, which if anyone hasn't had a look at this week, I would urge you to have a look at, because there are quite a lot of resources there as well. And I wanted now to just, before we hear from the speakers, just to sort of run over a few of the things that I think are really important at the moment. You know, we keep talking about the fact that we're out of COVID or coming out of COVID, having been immersed in it over the last 2 years. Although you'll hear from Donna in a little while, and sadly she still has COVID at the moment. So we know we're not out of it. But one of the major things, and it's maybe not so new to even be talking about this now, it was new for a while, but I think we've all been talking about it for quite a while now, but the emergence of new models of working has really been you know, very evident across a whole range of workplaces and employers, and there are articles, it's on the news, people are talking about it on the radio and in phone-ins, and employers, I think, are still in a stage of trialling different and new models of hybrid working, with people splitting their time, obviously, between home and office work. And all this is, you know, it's really interesting. It's offering a more flexible way of work and you know, contributing to people's work-life balance. But I think we always have to, in any of these discussions, we need to really think carefully about what this means for people who are carers. And I would just urge employers not to necessarily make assumptions about new ways of working, but to look at everybody's individual circumstances to make sure that if there are new working patterns being discussed, that, you know, have a chat with people in the staff. Obviously, people will be having sort of chats with all their staff, but for carers, there may still be particular concerns about returning to the work if they're returning to offices if they're still caring for somebody who's vulnerable. They might be worried about bringing COVID back into the house. But also don't make assumptions necessarily the other way, because many carers have felt very lonely and isolated while they've been working at home, and they've missed the interaction with colleagues. So I think getting into the office on certain days a week is really helpful as well, and it gives carers the opportunity to have a break and a life away from caring. One of the kind of complications, obviously, is if there are still services that are reduced as a result of COVID and that haven't quite returned back to normal, then that can place pressures, ongoing pressures on carers as well. So there are pros and cons about different models of working, and I would just sort of urge employers to have individual discussions that reflect people's individual circumstances. But it is a really good time to review workplace support, to look at policies, to look at identification, to look at all the ways that we communicate with carers, and to look at if things are changing in work, are these reflective of people's particular needs? I think, as I said earlier, I think there has been a greater recognition and awareness of the needs of carers, and that was perhaps reflected in the new discussion around employment rights and the legislation that the UK government has been pushing through to ensure that carers have 5 days carers leave. So that I think that's one of the kind of ways that we've, through highlighting the awareness on carers, it is beginning to become recognised. And I'll not talk too much about rights because Donna's going to cover that, but basically the right to carers leave and a change to requesting flexible working in that it becomes a day one right. Those are 2 of the kind of key things that's happening. We don't know of the timescale yet, but it's on the horizon. And another thing that certainly Carers Scotland and Carers UK and other organisations are going to be campaigning for is that caring becomes recognised as the 10th protected characteristic, because we think that will be a great help for carers in the workplace as well. But we can talk more about that. And many of the carer positive employers we engage with and many others already provide really good support in work, and recognise all those rights. But they also provide more, and there's a lot of good practice in place, and we'll hear about some of that. And I can't actually see now where, oops, sorry. Yep, okay, so rights are important, but it's much more than that. I think what's important for carers is that what does good practice feel like in a workplace? And I'll just cover these very briefly because I think I'm actually talking for too long. It's important to know that there's a strong culture of support in the workplace and that carers know that they're valued and they feel supported. And importantly, they feel comfortable about identifying themselves as carers and that they can see that their needs and are reflected in workplace policies and communications. And that support for carers is understood and it's endorsed and it's visible at all levels. And there are lots of ways that employers can do that. And we'll hear from a couple of employers very shortly, but it's something that just is, it feels embedded and it feels comfortable to be a carer. And I shall finish off by, for those employers here who haven't engaged with the carer positive process, I just wanted to very briefly show this to let you see that we can support employers through the process of developing workplace support, through how they might identify carers, how they might develop policies, the kind of practical support that they can put in place in the workplace and how they can communicate and raise awareness. And the carer positive process essentially works with employers to raise awareness of the growing number of people who are carers. It can talk about the business case. We can talk about the business case for supporting carers in the workplace. We know that it makes good business sense for a whole range of reasons, primarily connected with recruitment, with retention of staff, and with creating a more robust and resilient workplace. It's a very straightforward application process, as you can see there, and it's very flexible with a whole range of sizes and structures and sectors of organisations taking part. We've got around 236 carer positive employers in Scotland at the moment, and I'm really glad to see a good number of you here today. So I'll leave that at that, and people can get in touch if they want to find out more about Carer Positive. I've just also given you some links to some of our supporting information. It's free to take part in, and we provide support and resources all through the process. And finally, some other useful links that employers can access and that carers in your organisations can access as well. Just guides and leaflets and information from our websites and from the Vocal website. So I will come out of the slideshow now and end that, and hopefully that's me back in the room.
Brilliant, thanks. So that was really interesting, and I think it is key to sort of highlight that 1 in 8 in the workforce are balancing working and caring. It's quite a high number. So if you're looking around your office and your colleagues, you know, it is on the increase, as you say, as well, and 36 billion to the Scottish economy. It's big stats there as well. Yeah, I think there's lots of initiatives happening as well, as you say, around that are being trialled at the moment. The 4-day working week was launched on Monday this week as well. So I think we're all actively watching that to see what happens and what the feedback is from it as well. And I had a chat with someone with a company that's looking to recruit, and they said Gen Z are really challenging the working practices, the location and where they work from, and some are just not wanting to work in the office at all. They want to have that remote working flexibility. So it's going to be an interesting time for us over the next little while. But thanks very much. It's great to hear from you. Next up is Donna Reynolds, who is a partner at Blackadder Solicitors. Donna's going to talk to us about carers' leave and flexible working from the legal stance and the benefits to employers. But Donna herself, she specialised in employment law for over 17 years and is accredited by the Law Society of Scotland as a specialist in both employment law and discrimination law. Only one of 6 solicitors to have achieved this dual accreditation, which is absolutely amazing. Whilst Donna's area of expertise is discrimination, she also provides advice to employers in relation to employment law and HR related matters, ranging from contracts of employment and disciplinaries and grievances due to redundancies into pay. Donna's recent work highlights includes successfully defending an automatic unfair dismissal and sex discrimination case at an Edinburgh Employment Tribunal, helping an employer navigate its way through a complex capability process involving an employee with a mental health illness, which allowed the employee to stay in work after making reasonable adjustments, and providing an employer's staff with training and compliance with the reasonable steps defence to discrimination claims as well. We're absolutely delighted to have Donna with us to speak to us today about the forthcoming legislation and the changes in the current rights, protections and issues. So Donna, I will hand over to you. I will share your slides. So give me 1 second, I'll just get those up for you.
Thanks, Hayley, because despite how long we've been conducting these types of events and sessions online, I still haven't mastered PowerPoint. So if I can delegate it, I always do. So thank you. And thank you, Sue. I think you perhaps gifted me some of your time, which I'm quite grateful for. Thank you. So what I want to begin with is actually sharing something of a personal view. If we could move on to the first slide, Hayley. Which is something lawyers don't normally do. We will preach to you about the laws and the rights and the wrongs, but we're reluctant to share a personal view. But in my experience, anecdotally, what I can say is that a great deal of employers don't know how to deal with carers in the workplace, or more specifically, deal with the situations that carers present in the workplace, while a significant minority just don't want to. And there's a lot of conscious and unconscious bias there, and that in itself could be a whole session. But really, I'm an employment lawyer. I am a distress purchase. Employers come to speak with me when a problem has manifested in the workplace. Typically, a claim form has landed on someone's desk. It's usually the HR manager or the person responsible for HR. And the majority of the time we're dealing with these disputes because an employer, you know, not through malice or any bad intent, just genuinely did not know how to deal with the situation, or, as I say, a minority, sadly a significant minority, that just don't want just don't want to deal with a carer situation. I think, unfortunately, that unless you have been in someone's shoes who's had to provide, you know, has had to care for a friend or a family member, then the attitude is that I'm all right, Jack. They don't understand, don't want to understand. I think if I achieve anything with this short session this morning, you know, I appreciate you're here because you are looking out for your carers, you're supporting your carers, you are supporting them in the workplace. You're doing, you know, you're following all the good practice, which we're going to hear about shortly. But sadly, it's you know, that there are always one or two, you know, line managers in particular who struggle with the concept or don't want to understand. And so what I want to do today is perhaps arm you with some information, some scary information in some instances, that you can perhaps take back to your line managers. If you can't convince them of the moral case for this, then perhaps you can convince them of the business case. So there are 14.1 million disabled people in the UK. The vast majority of people are not born disabled. Disability creeps up on them in life, sometimes early life, sometimes later life. But 14.1 million disabled people, a great number of those will be in the workplace, some will not, but they will be someone's wife, husband, partner, brother, sister, friend. So many of us are connected to someone who has needs, who needs support. We've then got 9.4 million people in employment over the age of 50 in the UK. Now, as I say, disability is something that can creep up on people in life, and typically it's in later life. So if you're working, your workforce, there's the workforce population is aging, and they are going to present you with some challenges. There's no other word for it. And if they don't, then they are going to have a wife, partner, friend, etc. that you employ that is going to have to provide that support to them in their later years. Then we've got 5 million people in the UK juggling the care and responsibilities with work. And we know from recent studies that, you know, 44% of working carers struggle to balance their care and working responsibilities, with 24% stating that they had considered giving up their jobs as a result. We then know, I know as an employment lawyer, that tribunal decisions relating to flexible working have increased by 52%. They're at their highest levels. That's the direction of travel. The number of claims that we're going to have to deal with involving flexible working in one way or another are going to continue to increase. And discrimination cases are more likely to progress in the employment tribunal than any others. So, for example, a good percentage of unfair dismissal claims will settle or won't be pursued, but discrimination cases, for a variety of reasons, will go all the way through to a final hearing with the judgment. That is a substantial cost to an employer, both in terms of time and loss management time. As they prepare for and attend the hearing, there's the legal fees, there is the potential for an uncapped award, and then there's all the bad publicity that comes with it. So it really is costly. And what I really want to do as an employment lawyer is to avoid employers being in that situation. So there's no dispute that there is a moral argument or arguments made for the support of carers in the workplace, but again, there's a business case, it's a strong one. We know now about the loss to the economy, so spoken to that. It's impacting on productivity in the workplace. There are legal rights and obligations, which I'm going to come on to, which, if breached, have a significant financial impact on an employer. So it makes sense commercially, financially, it makes sense for the business to get it right. And so that's, you know, the one thing I want you to take away, because quite often numbers do speak volumes in the workplace. But let's come on now then to some of these legal rights that I have mentioned briefly. On the next slide, we're going to start with carers leave. So as we all know, the UK government published, well, first of all, launched a consultation, and then it published its response to carers leave consultation. there was a significant number of responses to that consultation, and there was a clear backing for the introduction of some form of carers leave. And so, as a result, the UK government will introduce legislation to provide for carers leave. And if we move on to the next slide, we'll see a summary of that. So as Sue mentioned, it will be a day one right. Now, some legal rights require you to have a certain length of service. This will not. It will be for those who are caring for a dependent, and we should be reasonably familiar with that word dependent from flexible working. So it will include spouse, partner, child, parent, person in the same household, or anyone else relying on the employee for care. The care must be required by the dependent in relation to long-term physical or mental illness, a disability, or as a result of issues related to old age. And you'll find typically that where there are physical or mental illness of a long-term nature, it will meet the definition of disability under the Equality Act, which I'll come on to shortly. If we move on to the next slide, here are some questions that I'm often asked about this new right. So what should the leave be used for? Well, it's for providing care or making arrangements for the provision of care for the dependent of the employee who requires that long-term care. It's not too dissimilar actually to the time off for dependents, which I'm going to come on to. The difference there is that time off for dependents is really about putting in place care arrangements where here it can actually be for providing care. It can be taken flexibly, which is great because a lot of statutory rights often have to be taken in blocks of 1 week. Here it's flexibly up to 1 week, and they can take it in half-day blocks up to the full 1 week, which can be quite helpful because we know that carers quite often just need a bit of time to accompany someone to a medical appointment, for example. That doesn't require a full day or doesn't require that full week. Yes, they're going to have to give notice. Again, a question I'm often asked. It's going to be similar to statutory holiday requests and pay. There, you must give double the amount of notice plus 1 day of the amount of leave they want. So if it's if they want 1 day, they're going to have to double that. So that's 2 days plus 1 day, so 3 in total. And that's the example here. And if we move on to the next slide. Does the employee need to give evidence of the care provision? No, they'll be able to self-certify, which is good, but if the employer suspects that the leave is being used without cause, so not for the intention, for the purpose it was intended, then that would be a disciplinary matter, and in that situation the carer might be asked to, well, they will be asked to evidence care. It might be the relationship. It might be, for example, the medical appointment that they had taken the time off for to attend. So whilst there's no need, you can self-certify, carers are going to be in the unfortunate position of having to keep records just in case, because that's the nature of care. You know, it can be sudden, it can be gradual, it can fluctuate. We never know sometimes what the care requirements are going to be, and if they are unfortunately in that position where that leave is being questioned, they're going to want to be able to explain it. So there will be a certain amount of record keeping. The good news is, and this would be expected, there's a right not to suffer detriment as a result of using carers leave, and if they're dismissed for doing so, that would be an automatically unfair dismissal. So again, there's no need to get into length of service, there's no need to get into the fairness of the procedure, the fairness of the decision to dismiss. It would be automatically unfair if the reason is found to be because of their exercising or wish to exercise carers leave. We don't know when this right will begin. It's when parliamentary time allows, so we're going to have to wait. And I think, unfortunately, the government may take a view that there are much more pressing matters to be dealing with. Wrong in my view, but I think that's the view that they have taken. Again, a personal view here, I think this carers leave is actually going to be of limited help to carers. I envisage that the most typical scenario will be the carer who needs to take a dependent to a medical appointment, as I said. It's a short-term, quick fix assistance, an emergency type situation that it will help with, but it's not going to assist in those situations where a longer-term arrangement or longer-term help is needed. And whilst a request cannot be refused by an employer, it can be delayed. And again, we all know that carers can be in situations where they just can't delay that need to be away from work to provide support. So I see it of being limited use. It's a great start, but of limited use. Personally, I don't see why employers need to wait for the government to legislate for carers leave. It's a contract of employment that governs a relationship between employer and employee, and they can include anything they wish in that, in the terms that govern that relationship, or they can include anything in any policy in a staff handbook they wish. So if they wish to provide for carers leave now before the government makes a statutory right, then I would absolutely encourage that they do that. And there's no need, if they choose to implement it now, for it to be paid. Again, it can be unpaid. But again, if you want to pay, that's fantastic. And I do know a lot of employers that do a lot around that. It's not necessarily labelled carers leave. Typically, it's compassionate leave, but there is an element of pay associated with it. If this is something that an employer wished to do now, then I think the best thing they could do to help themselves to avoid those potential disputes that every employment lawyer should be trying to avoid for employers is begin, as Sue said, with a clear definition of what it means to be a carer. Many people don't identify themselves as a carer. Their colleagues don't identify them as carers. So the chances of an employer doing that are then going to be slim. And of course, as I said, experiences vary. A working carer might be providing constant support. It might be a few hours a week. It might fluctuate. It might be at home. They might have to travel to support someone. It might be a sudden or it might be a gradual process. That definition should really be quite wide, if nothing else, to help our employees identify with the fact that they could indeed be a carer. This openness, this willingness to recognise that we have colleagues and employees in this situation will help build a culture of acceptance and understanding, which is really what we want our line managers to be promoting. We want line managers to be encouraging employees to come forward, and from there employers can then identify the carers and understand their specific circumstances, because as I say, they will vary. Employers are often very nervous about being informed about personal information, and I've heard so many arguments as to why they shouldn't have that information. Everything from, well, I might overstep the mark, to I've got GDPR obligations. And you're right, as far as GDPR is concerned, there are obligations around the collection, the use and the storage of personal information, but that should never prevent employers from doing really what is a legal obligation. For example, you have an obligation as an employer to provide a safe working environment. It's an implied contractual term in the contractual relationship. And you also have a duty to provide a safe place of work. It's a health and safety duty. Having this information forms part of that. And you can have conversations with other employers or an employment lawyer about then how you store it and use it, etc. But you should never be afraid about collecting that information. Once you've then built up a picture about your workforce and the employees you currently have within that workforce, you then want to develop a policy in the same way you'll have a policy to deal with maternity leave, holidays, sickness. It really should become just part and parcel of the staff handbook. It should be a normal go-to policy. Please don't state that details of the policy will be available on request. I've come up against that both in this context and transgender policy. It demoralises your employees and it belittles their situation. Their situation is just as valid as someone who's on maternity leave, so it's just as valid as someone who's on sick leave. So full details should be available and accessed on demand when they need it. And of course, I touched upon this very briefly, you might wish to extend the entitlement. You could make it longer, you could make it paid. There's so many creative things that you could do, and I know employers are doing right now. That policy will also outline people's different roles and responsibilities so that everyone's clear on how they can support working carers. For example, employees should be encouraged to talk to their manager or HR if they're caring for someone and need support. HR should seek to provide advice about supporting carers to line managers and employees as necessary, and colleagues should be educated wherever possible on what it feels like to a worker carer and what they can do to understand and support their colleagues with caring responsibilities. But a policy and you know, a list of support is great on paper, but if these aren't communicated or known throughout the workplace, they're likely to be of little benefit to carers. And I can tell you as well, Hayley in my introduction made reference to a reasonable steps defence. If, and I'll come on to this, we're getting into the realms of discrimination claims, and you cannot demonstrate to an employment judge that not only do you have a policy that's up to date and relevant for your workforce and your workplace, but it's also rolled out, it's understood, people are trained and regularly trained, and it's something you regularly come back to, you do not have a reasonable steps defence to discrimination. So this is both a good practice, but it's also a very good legal practice to adopt as well. Moving on then to the next slide, which is flexible working, and it will be something that you will all be familiar with. Over the years, it has taken many forms, it's been looked at, it's been tweaked, and now it's available to anyone, whether you wish to rearrange your working week or to suit yourself. Maybe perhaps you do have a disability, maybe you just like a bit of rest midweek. Perhaps you have caring responsibilities for a family member or a dog. It's open to anyone who wants to make the request. The difference is now is that the government is looking at changing it to make it a day one right. So if you have currently 26 weeks continuous service, you can make a flexible working request. The proposal is to remove that. There doesn't seem to be any appetite to change the 8 business reasons for refusing a request, and these are listed here. Of course, it can only be refused if one or more of these 8 business reasons apply, and the government hasn't really indicated that that's going to change. So what employers can do, and again, I see this, a lot of line managers have a very closed mind to this. And think that a job can only be done one way, and don't open up their minds to the possibility of being done a different way. Employers can help their line managers by really explaining, one, to their employees who are making this request, here are the grounds on which we can refuse it. So think about this when you're making your request. How might we overcome some of these business obstacles? But businesses, line managers themselves should really be thinking about, why is it that I automatically think that there's going to be an additional cost or a detrimental impact on quality, if not for themselves or their colleagues, but for their customers and their clients who are now demanding that businesses work in a different way, largely thanks to the pandemic. So, if you're not doing it for your colleagues' good, then do it for the business, the good of the business and the customers, which will bring the income in to keep that business sustainable. On the next slide, we've got they're looking at employers should be suggesting alternatives. Arguably that already happens as part of a good consultation process. Employers are having that conversation with their employees, but really employers now are going to really have to demonstrate that and document that if they want to defend any type of claim that might be brought. Administrative processes, should the 1-year time limit on further applications be changed? Currently you can only make one per year. Again, that's being looked at, and then the 3-month time limit to respond, should that be changed? Arguably employers do respond quicker than this, but it's certainly from a carer's point of view, as I say, situations can change and they can change unexpectedly, and it's a bit of a burden to ask them to wait a whole year before they can make another request, a formal request that is. And to make them wait 3 months for an employer's decision, again, it might just not be good enough in their particular circumstances. So I think that's really where the government could make a great impact, make a good impact here for carers. And then the greater use of temporary measures. I always say to employers, if you're unsure about a request that's been made, if you're unsure about that change, trial it. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be particularly long trial, say a month or 2 months, but you know, let's let everybody try it out, and if it doesn't work, well, at least we can say we tried. I think the government feels this has been underutilised, and anecdotally I think that's true. So if we can build something in there with temporary measures, I think that would really help both employers and carers demonstrate the viability of the changes they're proposing. If we move on to the next slide, I'm now going to, I'm conscious of the time, so I want to just quickly run through some of the other statutory rights that you'll be familiar with and the ones that carers will make the most use of. So the first is the time off for dependents. In my view, if there was to be any review, I think a review of this would be good, because I think reasonable, it's not defined anywhere, it depends far too much on the circumstances, but of course it's not the employer circumstances, it's the in this case the carer circumstances that are important. Also, employers do not understand that unexpected does not mean sudden. So if a carer is aware, say that someone that they provide care to, a family member has a medical appointment in 2 weeks' time, and there is the arrangements they had in place have fallen through, and there is no one else but this employee to take them to that appointment, that's still covered by time off for dependents, even though it's known, even though the employee can give some notice. The unexpectedness comes from the fact that the care arrangements have fallen through. And I think employers need to understand that a little bit better, because they're too quick to say no, simply because the request hasn't been made on the day of the event. Notification, I think employers could be a bit smarter there in educating their carers on what notification must be given to avoid any potential argument and unnecessary upset at the time of the of the event that requires the time off. So that's the reason, how long, and if there is any change to the circumstances which then has an impact on what's already been requested and agreed, a prompt update. Employers, it's not always possible to give that, but where it is, it should be given, because that really does annoy employers. And what we're trying to do here is make this a two-way relationship so that everybody is happy. And of course, it's unpaid. Moving on to the next slide. Again, the time off for dependents claims can be brought. So again, that's another reason why we want both parties to be educated about what's required here to have that time off to avoid complaints. Next slide, we are looking at parental leave. Now, it won't be suitable for every carer, but for some, again, this is something I feel that could be looked at, because it requires 1 year service, unless the child is entitled to disability living allowance. It's 18 weeks per child, 4 weeks per year, so it's a little bit more generous than some of the other statutory right, but it does have to be taken in blocks, and that might not always be suitable for a carer in their particular circumstances. It also does require 21 days notice. Evidence might be required, and it can be delayed. So it's not perfect, but for some carers, it will give them that little bit more time that they might need. I think this is ripe for reform in my view. And on the next slide, you'll see again that a claim can be brought to the Employment Tribunal if an employer prevents or attempts to prevent the taking of the leave, or otherwise treats the employee less favourably. The next, this is the one that I want to spend just the last few minutes that I have discussing. Coming back to the first slide that I'd spoken about, there are an awful lot of people in the workplace with a disability, or may have a disability in the future. And I think most employers are comfortable with the fact that they cannot unlawfully discriminate against their employees. And of course, a carer may find themselves, unfortunately, where the pressures of caring have been such that it's had an impact on their own health, such that it becomes a disability under the Equality Act. And I think why it's absolutely crucial that you build a relationship with your employees where you understand what's going on in their personal lives. And I know a lot of employers feel uncomfortable about personal lives coming into the workplace, but it's going to have an impact anyway, so it's better to know than not know. To know what's going on, so that If there is a change such as this, where an employee who was once not disabled, who then becomes disabled, you're in a position to meet your obligations and keep that person in work. We don't want to be losing staff if we can possibly help it. We've a lot of time, energy, resources has been spent on each and every employee. We want to keep them. But the other important point here is, and I don't think enough employers recognise this, an employee who does not have a disability can nonetheless be discriminated against by their employer because of their association with someone with a protected characteristic. Now, in this scenario, that's most likely to be disability or age. So an employee with a working carer has a family member that they provide care to, and they have the disability. If the employer, and here are the different types of discrimination, the employer can be guilty of unlawfully discriminating against their employee. And let me give you some examples. So direct discrimination is where a carer is treated less favourably than someone else because the carer is caring for an elderly or disabled person. At work, this could include an employer refusing to offer a job because of caring responsibilities. Let's imagine a carer applying for a job which involves a lot of travelling. They've the best skills and the experience for the job, but the employer knows they care for their son who's disabled. The employer makes an assumption that the carer cannot manage because they have a disabled son and so doesn't offer the carer the job. This is direct discrimination because the carer is associated with a disabled person. Treating a carer less favourably because of their caring responsibilities. Let's imagine an employer has decided to exhibit at various trade shows around the UK, which involves travelling and overnight stays. The carer, currently in employment, has the best skills and experience, but the employer knows they care for their elderly father. The employer makes an assumption that the carer cannot manage the trade shows because of their caring responsibilities and so doesn't ask them to go, or only asks them to go to local trade shows. This is direct discrimination because the carer is associated with an elderly person. Indirect discrimination until end of last year wasn't extended to this by association claim. It is now, and it's best demonstrated or explained with a claim from the employment tribunals. So this lady, Mrs. Fallows, was employed as a senior lending manager under a home working contract, but she attended the office 2 to 3 days a week. She needed to be employed under a home working contract as she had caring responsibilities for a disabled mother. Nationwide, who she was employed by, commenced a restructuring procedure where they needed all of these managers to be office workers to enable better staff supervision. So they've applied a policy to all employees, but it's put those with a disability at a substantial disadvantage. So as a consequence of this decision, Mrs. Fallows was put at risk of redundancy and a consultation process was commenced. And as part of that consultation process, there were more volunteers for redundancy than Nationwide needed. Mrs. Fallows didn't volunteer for redundancy, and during the consultation she requested to keep her current working arrangement and agreed to continue attending the office for a few days a week, but she was still made redundant. She brought claims of unfair dismissal, direct and indirect associative discrimination on the grounds of disability, indirect sex discrimination and indirect age discrimination. And she succeeded with the unfair dismissal and indirect associative discrimination on the grounds of disability, because the Employment Tribunal noted that the discrimination directive, which we take our discrimination laws from, intended to benefit those associated with a protected characteristic who are subject to less favourable treatment or a particular disadvantage. Mrs. Fallows had caring responsibilities for a disabled mother, which meant that she could not be a purely office-based worker. The new measures being implemented by Nationwide meant that she was put at a disadvantage through her association with her mother's disability, and therefore the decision to make her redundant was also discriminatory. And the Nationwide had failed to take reasonable steps to avoid her being made redundant. For example, they didn't consider current working patterns and her assertion that this would be suitable to continue. So they just failed to have that conversation, that consultation with her, and they made a number of assumptions. And that, for an employer, is one of the worst things you can do. And then finally, which is not on the list here, harassment, which is the unwanted conduct that relates to a protected characteristic. Very few cases involve someone going out with the intent of causing someone to feel violated or intimidated, hostile, degraded. But you do get those situations with office banter where someone thinks it's funny and the person on the receiving end doesn't. So teasing a carer because they're always checking their mobile phone at work, but actual fact what the carer is doing is checking their phone for messages from the person whom they provide care to. Being teased for that leaves them feeling uncomfortable and humiliated. That is harassment, and that's something an employer is responsible for. So discrimination I see being a bigger and bigger issue for employers and carers. I do think it'd be very interesting if it becomes the 10th protected characteristic. I think there's a very strong argument for it, because whilst they've got protection there through principally disability and age, perhaps doesn't go far enough, and it's quite difficult, well, not difficult, but it does require the carer to bring their circumstances into, you know, these areas of law. Whereas if it was a protected characteristic of its own right, then they would have those protections from day one. I'm very conscious I've just run over so slightly, so I'll just finish by saying that I know that you are not like most employers because you're here for a start. You're taking positive action, or you want to take positive action. You want to support your working carers, which is great. There are a few pitfalls, few traps to be careful of. I think discrimination is one of them, but there's a vast wealth of information out there. I'm happy to provide more. I'm sure you can get through more through Vocal and Career Positive. And if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat function and I'll be happy to answer them.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Donna. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now, I think. Done that. Well, there's a lot in what you've told us all there, and I'm sure it leads us very nicely into sort of break, so everyone can sort of think about some of those points that you've raised. And I've just made lots and lots of notes here. I think, you know, that moral in the business case, you've really illustrated that really, really well. And the fact that employment tribunals are increasing by 52%, that's huge. It really is. So it is, you know, like you say, people haven't got the emotional moral case. Definitely the business case is apparent. And with hopefully caring becoming a protected characteristic, that discrimination by association is something that I imagine we'll see on the increase as well. But yeah, I won't keep you back any further at the moment. I think everyone needs a little rest and a break from the screen. And yeah, thank you so much, Donna. I think if we sort of come back at 11:10, would that suit everybody? Would that be okay? Give everyone time to sort of take a comfort break and think about the second half of the session. I'll pop the agenda up as well, just so you know who's coming on in the second half. But any comments or anything, just pop them in the chat as well. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again soon. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, I think. Is that a way for everyone now? Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thanks everyone for staying with us and for the second half of the session this afternoon, or this morning even. So first of all, we'll start off with an employer's perspective and positive impacts. And we've got two great speakers here with us today. We've got Denise Turnbull from Phoenix Group, and we've also got Louise Guy from Scottish Water. I'll introduce Denise to you first, but then we'd like to share something special with you just before Denise shares her input with us today. Denise has worked for Standard Life, which is part of the Phoenix Group in Edinburgh for over 30 years, and she's the network lead for their carers network in Scotland. She's passionate about supporting carers, and as a carer herself knows the challenges faced and has been a sandwich carer. Denise has experience in providing care for a number of different scenarios and is always happy to share her experiences. And she does work very closely with ourselves here at Vocal and also Carers Scotland to raise awareness and support carers to try and improve their experiences. And she really is a true ambassador for carers and helping people to identify and seek out support as well. So I'll hand over to Sue, who's just going to share a short video clip with you before Denise speaks to us today.
Christine will do that
Oh, sorry.
much more ably than I will, and Denise is too shy to introduce herself in this video, but she plays a starring role. But just very briefly to say that we just wanted, as part of Carers Week, to celebrate some of the employers we work with, and we thought it was nice to sort of to commission some new case study videos, which we're really happy to launch today. But we're so happy to be able to feature Phoenix in one of these, which Christine will now show for us, and then Denise will be able to say a wee bit more.
Supporting carers can be very challenging, as no carer's journey is the same as another carer, and everyone's circumstances are different. But we try and be as flexible and open as we can be, so that we can meet the needs of all our carers and all of their specific requirements they have. We want this to be the best place that people have ever worked, and we want our carers to feel supported, and we want them to bring their best selves to work every day. We have a number of initiatives to support our carers. We have paid carers leave, which is a very important part of our offering, because it means that carers can get that additional time off without the stress and worry of taking holidays or having to ask for extra time off. We have flexible working, which means carers can work from home, they can work different hours round about the business needs. We also have the carers network, we have regular events, we have support in place, we can have one-to-one support, we can have group meetings. So there's a lot going on in the company to try and support our carers.
I'm a carer for my adult son. He lives with me, and obviously I have to be on hand when the need arises. When he was very young, I needed to take a lot of emergency leave. That would mean it would be deducted from my pay for the number of hours that I was absent. Before there was carers leave available, I had to plan my year when he was younger and allow holidays for caring, appointments, or in case there were any emergencies. Now I have the safety net of knowing if I have appointments for him that I have access to carers leave or emergency leave in the event of something unexpected happening. I think other employers should consider supporting carers in their employment, as they will get it back tenfold. As in any relationship, it works both ways. If employers look after carers, then carers will be helpful to them and go above and beyond.
We're very proud to be awarded the Carer Positive Award, and we worked our way up through the awards and gained the Exemplary Award, which was very important to us. I would encourage any other company to apply for the Carers Positive Award. It's really something that helps you focus on what you do for your carers and what more you can do for your carers. We're also happy to support other employers because we have the experience of working our way through the different levels, and it's a great way to get in touch with other companies and work together to improve the workplace for our carers.
Hi everyone, lovely to see you today. Don't know how I'm going to follow that, but I'll try my best. Lovely to see you all, and yeah, it was great to be involved with Carers Scotland to make that video, because certainly for us in Phoenix Group, it was great to go for that Carer Positive Award, because it helped us focus on what we do for our carers now, and what improvements we can make in the future, and it helped us realise all the great things we were doing, but also gave us other ideas of what we could do in the future. So as I said in the video, we've had a carers network since 2015, which has been actively supported by our carers. We introduced paid carers leave a number of years ago for 5 days. And when COVID struck, we realised that carers especially were impacted by that. They might have to provide more care, you know, the normal services that supported them weren't available. So we worked with the executive here and we managed to increase our paid carers leave to 10 days with an additional 5 days unpaid. And we also have a range of emergency leave, parental leave, and obviously compassionate leave. So I think that was a great weight off our employees' shoulders to know that that was available, because obviously overnight we're put into a different situation that we all didn't realise we were going to have to do. We're working from home, we had children there, we had people we were caring for, needed extra support. So I think for myself personally and everybody that cares within our company really appreciated that support from the company and knew that they were getting one less thing to worry about, especially with the pandemic hitting us as it did. And the other big thing obviously we did was the flexible working. So overnight we all came from working in the office to working from home. Technology obviously was a challenge, but we did pretty well with that, and within a few weeks we had the majority of people online able to work just as they did in the office. But it wasn't just the working from home. I think when you talk about flexible working, a lot of people just think, oh, that's working from home, but actually flexible working takes on loads of other forms. You've got a lot of people when they had their children at home, when the schools were shut, they maybe worked for a few hours in the morning, took a couple of hours off at lunchtime, mid-afternoon, and signed on again in the evening to complete their work. So there's also when you work and how you work, and they maybe changed their working patterns, maybe worked longer days, had a day off, all that kind of thing. And we encouraged all our carers to speak to their line managers and work out what could be done for them individually that also suited the business need. So we still have to serve our customers and be there to answer their inquiries. So going forward, we're really keen that we keep that flexibility. That is one of the positives of COVID, that we have all proved we can work from home, we can be productive, we can work our own hours, we can still get our day job done as well as caring for relatives. So we're keen to continue that, and people are doing a mixture of hybrid working at the moment. I'm coming in a couple of days a week and working from home a couple of days, which is quite nice just to break up the routine. If I have set meetings, I know I can come into the office, and if I have a day full of meetings online, I can stay at home and get the peace and quiet to have the meetings there. So there really are a lot of benefits that we have here that we want to keep in the future. And as I say, the Carer Positive Award is a great way to help you look at what you do at the moment and what you can do in the future. And it also opens up contacts, obviously through Carers Scotland and also Vocal, to get in touch with other companies and learn from them and work together to improve the lives of carers. So that was all I was really going to cover at the moment. I don't know if there's any questions just now or you want to take them later on, but I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thanks very much, Denise. I think Louise has got her hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Denise. Just to say, I've experienced the support that Phoenix give firsthand. My husband works for Phoenix and he's in a caring role for his parents who are in Durham. So it's a long distance caring role, and as you can imagine, he's up and down there quite a lot. But he's able to do his work whenever he needs to do it, and actually is in quite an operational role, so it's quite difficult at times. But his team and his manager support him so well. So I'm really grateful for that. For that level of support that he gets as well. It's really, really inspiring for me, especially coming from Scottish Water, where I've had support in the past. So just to say thank you for that. I was interested in the 10 days of leave for carers that you managed to secure. Is that still in place?
Yes, that's going to be a permanent fixture, Louise, because we did always feel that 5 days maybe wasn't always enough, because depending on what your caring is, you might use up that 5 days very quickly, and it's also pro rata as well. So if you work part-time, you don't get the 5 days. So no, it's definitely a permanent thing, and we're always going to keep the sort of emergency leave and special leave and compassionate leave as it was before as well. And there is always unpaid leave as well that people can take if they really have used all the other leave that they can do. But I'm delighted to hear about your husband, Louise, because I know there are a few carers in here who are long distance carers, so they need to take a few days off at a time to obviously travel down, and use the carers leave. And I know myself, I've had a phone call from my auntie who's fallen over, and I've had to rush to her house, and unfortunately during COVID she was lying on the floor for 5 hours before the ambulance came. So it was great to say to my boss, right, I've actually got to go away, I'm really sorry, I'll get in touch later on. And I knew I didn't have to make up that time, I could just put through the carers leave, and that was a relief for me, not having to worry about work. I could just focus my auntie and getting her sorted. So yes, it's definitely a permanent thing, and we'll always try and keep anything that we've got at the moment and also try and improve it in the future.
Brilliant, thanks for that.
Thanks, Denise. Well, thank you. Brilliant video as well. Great to see that. And yeah, the Phoenix Group are doing some fantastic things. Well, that leads us on to our next speaker, which is Louise herself from Scottish Water. Louise has worked at Scottish Water in the Digital and Transformation Directorate since the late 2010. She's fulfilled a number of roles in the Directorate and is currently Digital Partnership and Performance Lead there. Louise has also been in a caring role herself since she was pregnant with her son in 2011, and her mum was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis, who was also caring for her stepdad, who had a number of severe health issues as well. As Denise's mum's illness progressed, she had the news that her dad had cancer. Essentially, Louise ended up juggling caring for 3 adults who lived 230 miles apart. Through major procedures, surgery and end-of-life care. And I think that's it. A lot of people do sandwich caring and multiple caring roles as well. Louise lost her wonderful mum in 2017 and her stepdad in Christmas Eve in 2020. Although the geographical challenges in providing support to are no longer there, she's providing support to headstrong pensioner, her own dear dad, remains, and she also supports her husband in his role for caring for his parents, which you just touched on there. Louise joined the Scottish Water Carers Network during her storm, as she calls it, and on the other side wanted to help support carers across Scottish Water in the way that she'd been helped throughout the challenges that she'd faced herself personally. Louise, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you very much. Oh, that was quite an emotional thing for me, hearing that from somebody else. It's quite a thing, isn't it? So I'll calm myself down and I'm fine. Yeah, just delighted to be able to come on and say hello to everybody. And as Denise was saying earlier, being part of Carer Positive and having going through the awards with them does really connect you with other organisations and other people and get a different perspective. And I think that's really, really important for us at Scottish Water, to be learning all the time and to be able to share with everybody about what we do and our experiences and gather those in from you as well. So essentially what we do in Scottish Water, very similar to Phoenix, we do have a carers network. It's part of our Belong network. So we have, this is our diversity and inclusion team who run our Belong network for us. The carers network is part of that. At the moment we have 130 carers who are part of the network in Scottish Water. However, from a recent survey that we did across the whole of the organisation, which is just back in March, 1 in 7 people who filled out that survey, which wasn't all of the employees, by the way, I think it was about 60%, 1 in 7 identified as a carer. And many of those people have more than one caring responsibility, juggling at once. The really interesting part of this for us, and this is what we've touched on here, and I know that Donna had touched on this earlier when she was talking about it, is the encouraging people to identify themselves as a carer, that not only their understanding but why they don't want to. Within that survey as well, identifying as a carer was the one thing that people said they didn't feel comfortable answering. It was the highest, so it's like, I'd rather not answer. That was picked the most for that. I'm a carer. Okay, so there's obviously, even though all the stuff that we try to do in Scottish Water for our carers, there's obviously something stopping our carers from identifying themselves. Actually today we've started up a conversation about declaring you're a carer and how that feels in Scottish Water, and we started that up on our internal kind of Twitter feed to try and get the conversation going and to try and understand a little bit more about what's, why do people worry and are concerned about that. We understand those that want to separate work and their caring responsibilities, but what else is underlying, and we'd really like to get to that in case there's other things that we can do to support the carers and allow them to be telling people that they are a carer and get all the support that they need. So this week we're doing lots of things to support this fantastic week of Carers Week. We have sponsors for our Carers network, and those guys have both done videos to raise awareness, to point people in the right direction for support, and to encourage our carers to look after themselves. So we're doing a piece on resiliency later on in the week. We also have one of our carers giving a carer story about her journey and how it feels to be a working carer, and how she's managed to juggle that. But what she's also highlighting is the fantastic work that our carer centres do and in supporting carers, and we do find that people don't really know enough about carer centres, and we do try to push those to our people a lot, because we see a lot of benefits. So we're doing a couple of stories on that as well this week. In general, we do very similar, as I said, to Phoenix. We're there to support the community. The community that we've built in the Carers Network is to connect our carers together, to give them support, to give them advice, point them in the right direction, to show them all of the support that Scottish Water can give them. For example, employee assistance programme, the Carers Leave that we do have in place, the policies that we have in place to support carers and families and people with caring responsibilities. We have mental health first aiders as well, who can play a great part in supporting our carers, particularly when they hit that bit where they're now reaching out for help, which, as I think we all know, it takes an awful long time for that realisation to hit, and actually sometimes it's a little bit too late. So our mental health first aiders are great to support in that way. We do have hybrid working, and we're kind of working on the policies around that. Although we have some in place, we're always looking at how that changes and how to flex that. So what we did when we were looking back a couple of months ago at another review of our hybrid working is we ran one of our carers cafes, which we do regularly. We have them monthly, and it's all virtual at the moment and online, as you can imagine. But we did run a section of the carers cafe to discuss hybrid working and to discuss with our carers how they felt about the offices opening up, how they felt about working in general, how they felt that they were supported through their caring responsibilities through flexible working. Within our organisation, it's quite different to Phoenix, because obviously we have people out there doing a job that they have to physically go and do. They have to be outside, they have to be away from home to do. If you think about our water treatment works, if you think about if there's a blockage and they've got to go and fix that, so they're on the roads, they're at customer premises, they're going to meet our customers to talk about building works or repair works or whatever else we're doing. We have lab staff who have to be in the labs to do the testing to ensure that your water is not infected with anything, you know, so it's like it's essential. So it's about how do we balance that, and how do we ensure that those people who have the caring responsibilities there also have that flexibility to be able to care from home. And certainly within our hybrid working guidance, we focus on the work that has to be done, and I think that Donna had kind of touched on that as well. It's kind of like, what is the work that needs to be done, and then therefore having that conversation about how we can get that work done, as well as supporting the carers and the needs that they have. A little bit like what Sue had touched on earlier, the major concerns for our carers were mixing with people again after COVID, taking COVID or something else back to the people they care for, or contracting something themselves, which has stopped them from being a carer for a while. But on the flip side of that, there was a lot of them that wanted to get back to the office and get that a little break and a bit of different human contact to what they'd had. So again, we're trying our best to support everybody. But you know, what I will leave you with is the big challenge that we do have in identifying all of our carers. You know, 1 in 7 is quite high, but as I said, that wasn't everybody that answered that survey, and certainly not everybody declaring that they're carers. So we have a feeling that it's a lot higher than that. So that's our challenge. So anybody who has any ideas about how we can draw people out a little bit more, you know, we tell them that it's confidential, but we do try to bring people together with their line managers, and we do constantly educate our line manager community about caring and that responsibilities and what support they have to support their people. So yeah, I'd be really interested to hear if anybody's got like the golden bullet, you know, where is it? How can we get them all and they all put their hands up and say it's us, so that we can actually provide that care that we need to.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Louise. And I think you've touched on a question that crosses even us at carer centres as well. Identification is such a big piece, and we're constantly trying to put the message out there and working with yourselves to identify people. You're all doing amazing work, you know, highlighting why people should identify themselves, what the support is there, but ultimately it comes down to the individual. And some people will never identify themselves as a carer. We've had carers come to us in their late 80s at Vocal, having cared for an adult child all their days, and it's only when one of the parents passed that the gentleman said, I can't cope anymore, I can't do this on my own anymore. And it's at that point that he was at crisis that they came to us for support. But he got that support in the end, which was the good part of that, and his son excels as well. So, but Sue, I think you had your hand up there. Oh.
Hi, sorry, Hayley, I did kind of unintentionally, but I will come in.
Oh, sorry.
Anyway, no, I'm
on the spot there.
You know that way that you kind of hover about the icons and you find yourself just clicking. So, but I'll come in anyway, because Louise, I mean, absolutely that point, and all the work that we do with employers and across all the almost 10 years that we've been working with employers, identification is the one that comes up most consistently, and it is the biggest challenge for employers. And there isn't a golden or silver bullet, or whatever the expression is. There isn't a right answer. And I kind of wish there was, but I know there isn't. I think all you can do is just to keep, it's almost like drip feeding in as many different ways as possible, through, you know, across as many different routes and mechanisms, you know, with as continual awareness raising as possible. With I think that with anything that you're doing, it's about reinforcing positive messages of support, which obviously Phoenix and Scottish Water do. But I think certainly sometimes when an employer maybe out of the blue decides to survey employees and ask if anyone is a carer, you know, I think sometimes that can lead to kind of maybe nervous perceptions about, you know, why is my employer wanting to suddenly find out who's a carer? Anything like that should always be done, obviously, in parallel with explaining why an employer wants to know, you know, which of their staff are carers, and that you're asking because you know you need to know who a carer is to be able to offer how to, you know, to talk to them about the best way of supporting them. So just anything that reinforces that positive message. And I think with many carers as well, they might choose not to, you know, as you said, they might just choose to keep that part of their lives private. But in an employment sense, as long as they know and that they feel comfortable that if it did come to a critical point in things, that they could speak to their employer and they knew that the support was there. And I think Ariane makes a really good point in the chat about having personal stories and case studies. I think if people can relate to other carers and see those similar sort of experiences and stories, they'll feel more comfortable. But yeah, no right answer. Just keep going with as many different ways of highlighting why you're trying to kind of find the information out from carers and encouraging them to, you know, to feel comfortable enough to have those conversations. And I'll stop now.
That's all right. I think Roxana, you had your hand up, but it's gone down now, so I'm not sure.
Richard has though. Hayley.
Oh.
Oh, sorry, Roxanne.
Pick Roxanne
I
up
don't know
first.
how. Yeah, I had my hand up. Then I don't know what happened. It just went down again. So, yeah. So Hayley, like yourself, obviously able to identify carers in the South Asian community can be very challenging in itself. So we are proud to be carer employer with obviously with Sue. So I'm glad that we've done that. We're able to recognise working carers. Through that, you know, you've got the training and, you know, the type of questions that you're asking. Sometimes it can be really hard because the carers from the South Asian community, they think it's their duty. They're not classified as carers, if you know what I mean. They think it's their job to be looking after the elderly. So you need to ask questions. When I started off, I think it was 4 years ago, taking over the carers group, we had about 15 carers, identified carers. Now I've roughly got near over 110 carers.
Wow.
This is asking the question, do you care? You know, I've done a lot of different activities, being able to recognise carers and just asking subtly. You have to be very careful how you put the question to them and say, look, do you care for someone? Is it your mother? No, I'm not a carer. Yes, but I do look after my mother-in-law, my father-in-law. This, no, but I'm not a carer. It's my duty to do that. So it can be very challenging. And Donna, you know, that was an eye-opener. So a lot of carers from the South Asian community stop working. They think it's, you know, we can't cope with appointments. We can't cope with this. And again, what do I say to my employers? I'm a carer. Will I get my job? Will I, you know, there's a lot of things attached. So they stop working altogether or they go part-time. Sophia, who's our manager, she's also a carer. So we have recognised carers within our organisation through Carer Positive. So yeah, but I'm really enjoying the session and it's an eye-opener. Thank you.
Very much, Roxanne. I know that's great to get your input, definitely. And like you say, culturally, it's very different as well, how carers identify themselves with that feeling of duty. Richard, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, actually, I was just going to say similar to what Roxana just said then, and actually people, how they see themselves and not seeing themselves as carers, but seeing themselves as somebody's husband or wife or father, etc., etc. And that is hugely important in terms of how you can support the identification. And actually, some of the, if you read a lot of the research and when you sort of listen to carers, and there's sometimes an association of guilt in asking for help because they see it as part of, as Roxana described, their duty to care. And actually, so that guilt can sometimes prevent them from reaching out and actually asking for help, because I think if I ask for help, then I've somehow failed in what I should be doing as my duty as a partner or as a son or whatever that role is. And that is a huge challenge, I think, as well. And I think how we engage with people to sort of support them through that process, and not to have any negative consequences as a result of pointing at them and saying you're a carer and you need help, and actually not facilitating further guilt or a further negative impact on health is hugely important too. But yeah, I think the identification issue is hugely challenging, and actually it's really good that we're sort of talking about it here and thinking about it within lots of different contexts: work, culture, society, and some of the other impacts. So thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Donna?
Yeah, I just want to continue the discussion about carers and whether they recognise themselves as carers or not. From a legal perspective, it's not, the onus is not on the carer to identify themselves as a carer. And I appreciate the reasons why they don't is very complicated, but simply as an employer with your obligations, particularly under the Equality Act, once you are on notice of a potential or an actual protected characteristic, whether it be the carer, the working carer, or the person whom they care for, you then have an obligation to do certain things or not do certain things, as the case may be. So I think it's really important that I'm hearing all these great stories about, you know, persevering, you know, and whilst the carer, the working carer, doesn't want to attach that label to themselves, we're still advertising the fact that we have this support and we're here for you. And, you know, there's an old expression, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But as long as the water's there, you know, and that's the key thing. So both morally and legally, that's the right thing to do. You keep communicating, you keep talking, and you keep doing what you can to ensure that when the carer inevitably needs that support, it's there, they know how to access it. That's really important.
Can I just jump in a wee minute again, because actually I thought one of the points you made, Donna, during your presentation about, and I hadn't really fully been aware of this in terms of the discrimination laws, that if an employer hasn't, you know, made fully aware, hasn't communicated the policy support and what's in place, you know, that can actually highlight that they're at fault in any of, you know, in a case like that. I thought that was really interesting. I hadn't made that connection with raising awareness, but I think that's important in this context across a whole range of kind of employer supports. And it's also why I think it's really important that good policies are in place, and that if there's a carers policy, and if not a carers policy, something that absolutely makes clear to carers where they are reflected, you know, within any kind of suite of HR policies. Because the number of times I've looked at some employer policies who, nobody here I have to say, and most people I work with not, their policies are very clear. It's helpful for folk who maybe haven't made that identification. If they look through policies, if you don't see yourself or your situations that are represented in workplace policies, if all you see is parental care, maternity, paternity, childcare, if you don't see any mention of that broader spectrum of caring, you know, it's really disheartening, and that's likely that's going to be something that will put somebody off going to their line manager or going to HR. So I just wanted to make that link with communication and awareness and kind of positively reinforcing support across, you know, all kind of areas of workplace policy and support. Denise, sorry.
Denise.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we're always constantly looking at our carers policy and updating it, because as you can imagine on a policy, you know, everyone can read it differently and it's open to interpretation. Like, we had some words like non-routine appointment, which we took out because if your loved one that you care for has a routine appointment at the hospital, you can take carers leave for that, because obviously you've got to go and support them and you've got to take them, that kind of thing. And we also had a bit in about primary carer as well, which we've removed, because you don't have to be the primary carer to get carers leave. You could be like Louise, where you're sharing the care for your parents or other loved ones. So, you know, we're always looking at the wording and always taking feedback from our members of staff, because as you know, with any policies, they can be open to interpretation. You want to make them as clear as you can, and also want to encourage people to take the carers leave and use it. So we want to make the policy as straightforward as possible. And I think, yeah, we're like everybody else that's talked about here as well. We have a problem identifying our carers, but we have had a Who We Are survey within our work, which is all about diversity and inclusion. And there are a lot of questions in that about obviously different aspects of people's lives. And obviously there is a caring question. And unfortunately, I don't have up-to-date stats, but we do know that quite a few people have identified as carers and have taken carers leave. So, you know, their measurements we're getting in place to record in the future. And we know that more people have taken carers leave during COVID than before. So obviously the word's got out and people are using it maybe because they're desperate or because they didn't realise it was there and then realised it was.
Thanks, Denise, and that's great that you've removed that word primary carer, because there's so much pressure on that primary carer sometimes, and those around them, wider friends and family, aren't maybe always able to access, or don't feel like they should be able to access the same level of support because they're not in the primary caring role. So it's great that you're reviewing that language. Anyone else have any sort of comments, questions, anything they'd like to add? I'm just trying to keep a wee eye on the chat as well. Rona?
Hi, yeah, thanks everybody and for inviting us along. We're quite new on our journey, so I'm the managing director for Harvey Nash I set up the business in Scotland where we've only got about 40 employees, but I've taken over England and Ireland as well, and I'm actually the elder sister to my sister Lindsay has Down syndrome. She's always been really high functioning, but She still lives with my mum, who's now 74 and is going through the process of a diagnosis for early onset Alzheimer's. So her care needs are becoming quite rapidly changing, and I've moved back closer to where I grew up to be closer to my mum and help share that care responsibility. We have had people in our organisation in Scotland who've cared for elderly parents, and we've kind of done, I think, a good job, but it wasn't particularly formal or structured. So, you know, we want the culture piece right. But what would be really helpful for me is if anybody is okay with it. Helen was on the call earlier, who's one of my HR business partners, and we're wanting to tighten up the wording around a carer policy in our. So if Andy could share that, otherwise Helen's going to have a stab at writing it herself. And then also we're going to try and champion the paid carers leave as well throughout the organisation. So we're kind of, you know, we're starting, and we have done quite a lot, but we just want to now get it a bit better. So thanks for having us.
Excellent, thanks, Rona. Yeah, and I think there's a wealth of support that Sue and the team at Carer Positive can help you with the policy side of things, and it's great to hear that you're going to be championing paid carers leave as well. It's probably worth just mentioning at this point as well, Sue and I sort of facilitate the Edinburgh Employers Network as well. So if you're an organisation that has a base in Edinburgh, you'd be welcome to join that as well. We meet bi-monthly virtually, as we have done throughout the pandemic. We haven't met face to face yet because we've got people from, you know, from the Dumfries and Galley right up to sort of the north, so it's been easier to facilitate it virtually. But we'll maybe get together at one point. But you're welcome to join that as well.
That'd be great.
And I'll get some policies over to you, Rona.
Super, thanks for that.
I think that's it. It's just there's lots of support and lots of good work out there. It's just sharing that we're all driving the train in the same track, and to achieve positive outcomes for carers. So it's great that we can all share that learning, as I think others mentioned earlier as well. Any other final comments or questions before we sort of head to close? Lots to think about, I'm sure. So if there is anything, you know, keep in touch and pop it in the chat. But I will hand over to Richard shortly, who's going to wrap up and close the session for us today. Richard leads the team at Carers Scotland and Carers Northern Ireland, and he joined in January 2022. He has extensive experience working in the third sector in senior leadership roles, including recently as Head of Policy and Public Affairs at Marie Curie, where he led award-winning campaigns to change legislation and influence public policy. Richard has a proven track record in managing departments, teams and projects covering public affairs and stakeholder engagement plans, research projects, corporate communication activities and strategy development. He's worked for a range of organisations including Barnardos Scotland, Fleshman Hillard, NHS Quality Improvement and the Home Office as well. Richard is currently studying a Master of Public Health at the University of Edinburgh as well. So he's got a big role with Carer Scotland, and he's also studying as well. So that can't be an easy role, Richard. But I will hand over to you now to close for us, if that's okay.
Thanks, Hayley. That actually makes me sound really good. I'm quite pleased. I wasn't expecting you to read all of that biography out, so yes, thank you for that. Well, firstly, thank you, everybody. I think that has been a fantastic morning, and I'm really pleased to have been here and delighted to get a chance to close the session. I've been taking lots of notes throughout the discussions and the presentations, so and it's been a really good morning. As Hayley was saying, I've just been in the post for around 5 months, so this is actually my first Carers Week as the director of Carers Scotland, and I'm just learning more and more and more. And although, as you just heard from that biography, I've worked in organisations that have worked with family and unpaid carers, and so many of the issues are pretty familiar to me. But I think since joining Carers Scotland, what's really struck me is the challenge that faces people who care and work, and just simply the scale and the need that comes with that. And Sue in her presentation gave some pre-pandemic statistics around carers and working carers. And actually, I've got some slightly more up-to-date ones, which suggest that actually we're nearly at the 900,000 mark in terms of people who are caring in Scotland at the moment. And of those who are working, that number could well be in excess of 350,000, juggling obviously care and work. And obviously we know what a demand that can be on people and how exhausting it can be. And there's a real risk. There's lots of evidence out there to show that if you're in an unpaid caring role, then your chances of being in full-time or even any paid employment is seriously reduced. And actually, we did a report at Carers UK in 2019 that showed that 7% of people who are caring in Scotland have to give up work in order to care, which is a really high number. Interestingly, what that same report also showed that if you asked carers what they wanted from employers, is an 86% of them said actually having an understanding employer and line manager is really important to them to enable them to continue to care and to work. And actually what also was really high in that survey result of carers was they also wanted flexible working. Interesting that that was taken in 2019 before the pandemic. So the fact that we've moved beyond that and into the world of flexible working shows that that is something that they've always wanted. I'm really, I think having an understanding employer and all of those things that we've talked about is why the Carer Positive scheme is so important. And I'm really delighted that Carers Scotland hosts the Carer Positive scheme, and Sue and Christine and Rena work really hard to ensure that working carers are supported by employers and organisations. And it's great to hear how many organisations are committed to carers and supporting them to remain in work by being what those carers need, which is an understanding employer. As I say, I'd like to thank everyone for contributions today, and for Hayley for chairing, and for Vocal for sharing the hosting duties with Carer Positive. I think there's a lot to sort of digest in what we've heard this morning. I think Sue really sort of highlighted how the world of work has changed as a result of COVID. And that change, I think, brings huge opportunities to do things better and differently, and especially for carers who are working, and that flexibility that they've been asking for since long before the pandemic. There's now an opportunity for us to embrace that. Sadly, what I have been seeing a bit in the media of late is this sort of push to go back to what was before, whether that's a blanket return to full-time office working or how organisations worked before. Sadly, some of that has come from quite senior people in senior places like the UK government we've seen. And I think that's a backwards step. And actually, I think progressive organisations will they'll read the wind of what employers are telling them, and they will say actually flexible working is where we want to be. And organisations that offer that, I think, will create opportunities for themselves in drawing from a better and more skilled workforce than the ones that say no, you must come to the office 5 days a week, 9 to 5. So we must grasp those opportunities that have been presented to us post the pandemic. So thanks for that, Sue. Donna's presentation on the rights of carers in the workplace, particularly in relation to leave and flexible working, is really important to hear. People must know their rights and be supported to use them when they need them. But better still, let's have employers that are steeped in those rights and proactively meeting and offering them to employees, ones that really know what they're talking about and can really support the carers in their workplace. So thanks for that, Donna. That was a really good presentation. And I think obviously, companies and organisations like Scottish Water and the Phoenix Group show just what is possible in the workplace and what it means for carers. So thank you to Louise and Denise for presenting those case studies, and particularly thank you to Denise and the Phoenix Group for participating in the excellent video, which I think will help spread the word about why it is so important and what a difference supporting employers can make to working carers. I'm really looking forward to showcasing that video right across our many networks, not just this week in Carers Week, but for many weeks and months to come. Again, great discussion. I think the identification issue is a huge challenge, and great to sort of hear different sort of reflections on that in terms of how we can sort of meet some of the challenges associated with identification. And thank you to Rona and to Harvey Nash for talking through some of the progress that they're making, and actually the recognition as to why supporting carers in their workplace will be important. That was really good to hear. Carers Scotland is a campaigning organisation, and we will continue to fight for carers' rights, and we will work with everyone who can help make life better for carers. And we talked about we need the UK government to bring forward that legislation that Donna was talking about guaranteed unpaid leave and first day rights to flexible working. Sadly, the employment bill, which most of those changes were going to be included in, were not put in, were not announced in the recent Queen's speech. And that to me is a massive disappointment and a missed opportunity by the UK government to start work on those, because without it being in this year's Queen's speech, it pushes it to much later in this government's term, and actually we might have to wait for another election now before we see some of those. But Donna is also right. We don't need that legislation. Good organisations can start doing that now. And actually what the government is offering, although is good, and we welcome it, and we will always support any improvement in rights to working carers, but actually we want more. We want to see paid carers leave. Absolutely, we want to see paid carers leave. Many carers will not be able to afford to take unpaid leave, so actually yes, we welcome what government's offering, but we absolutely need to go much further, and we want to see paid care leave. And actually, we want to see organisations to take this on themselves, because actually it's good for their business, it's good for their employees, and good practice is really what we want. And so, absolutely, we want to see carers supported to work if they want to. They must be supported back into work if they choose to after their caring role is finished. And it's good for employers, and it's good for businesses, and it's good for carers and families, and it's good for the economy and communities. So I hope that as a society that we can continue to do everything to ensure that working carers get to both thrive both at work and at home. And I guess just to conclude is to say thank you to everybody here for all the support that you give and have given today and during Carers Week, but not just Carers Week, because I know you're giving support every week. So thank you. I noticed Rona's stuck a hand up, so I'm happy to answer a question if you have one.
Yeah, sorry, I just wondered, because it was really interesting you talk about the paid carers leave. And again, before we knew what we were doing, we actually, so that somebody who at the time was more junior, but she's now my director that heads up the whole Glasgow office, I gave her a day off paid for about a year, take her mum to the Beatson for cancer appointments when she was terminally ill. But on the call, like, you know, just a sort of virtual show of hands, or if anybody knows, what are the stats now for, like, you know, what percentage of employers are doing paid carers leave, just to kind of strengthen our business case?
I don't. So do we have any stats at Carer Positive about that?
We don't know how many
It'd be a really
employers
good question
are.
to ask, actually, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we know roughly which of our carer positive employers are providing care leave, but I would need to kind of have a wee look at that. But more widely than that, you know, across Scotland or the UK, I don't know how many are providing paid carers leave. It would be really important and helpful to know.
Maybe something we can ask the Edinburgh Employers Network, or more
Yeah.
widely, is we could do a little sort of form survey or something like that, because like
Yeah,
you say,
I think
it's something
we
that's
could-
come up quite a lot, hasn't it? And it's changed a lot, I think, with COVID as well.
Yeah.
And organisations that have maybe had call centre staff have said, no, we can't offer any level of flexibility and it's not feasible. Quite quickly, over a number of weeks, have been able to manage that operation remotely. So I think it's definitely increased, offering carers leave, but I'm not sure about the percentage that's paid versus unpaid. And that's definitely what we want to get to, because as Richard said, most people can't afford to take unpaid leave.
Yeah, well, I mean, that person, she's actually now, I mean, she stayed in employment with us, and she's, you know, she really values what we did for her, but otherwise she was going to have to leave because she needed extra time off. She at that point was single and had a mortgage to pay, and she's like, I just don't know how I would do it, because, you know, it was just the additional responsibility. And then after actually her mum died, we continued to let that run, because she would go to yoga on a Wednesday, and it just allowed her to get back in a healthy headspace. So it's so important. And, you know, if you've got somebody that works for you for a long time, it's a drop in the ocean, really.
Yeah.
And you've just touched on a really important issue there, Rona, about post-caring support.
Mm-hmm.
And actually how when people do caring role ends, they will often need support transitioning back to or not necessarily even back, but into a new way of doing things. So that is hugely important too, is how we support people after their caring role ends.
I was just going to very briefly say also that I know a lot of employers maybe sometimes use a kind of almost like a pick and mix of different forms of leave. They'll sometimes use some special leave, some compassionate leave. You know, there are all different policies that cover work-life balance and family friendly. And I think that probably highlights again one of the needs for having a kind of very clear carers leave, which not to say that that can't then be supplemented with additional special leave, but it's difficult sometimes to be able to gauge, because I know that employers dip in and out of, you know, different policies for providing leave. But I think consistency is a key thing in this, because it can vary across organisations depending on what line manager, you know, decides to do. So consistency is another key point.
Definitely. Well, great. Thank you so much, everyone. There's a few more comments coming through on the chat, but we're at 12:01. We're just a little bit over, but I think it's been fantastic discussions today, and can only thank you all so much for joining us, to Donna, to Sue, to Denise, Louise, Richard, and everyone's contributions today as well. Please do keep in touch with Sue and Christine, Rena, myself and Linda at the vocal team as well. And I think Christine's just popped a little survey in the chat box as well, so we really appreciate your feedback on the session today as well. But I'm sure we'll all be in touch soon, and if you've got any questions or support that you need, just reach out. You know where we are. But thank you all so much, and we'll bring everything to a close if that's okay.